All right, so let's dive into AI and how it's impacting prostate cancer diagnosis. You've given some fascinating research articles, expert opinions, even a case study, and it really seems like you're ready to get into the details of how AI could change things in the clinic.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating area, especially when you start thinking about how human expertise and AI could work together.
So right now, it's mostly radiologists looking at MRI scans,
Yeah.
and then they make recommendations to a multidisciplinary team that's an MDT, right? And that team decides about biopsies.
Yeah.
But, like, I'm sure there are limitations to that.
Yeah, and those limitations are kind of driving a lot of the interest in AI right now.
So what are we talking about? What are the big challenges with the way things are done now?
Well, one of the major challenges is that how accurate a diagnosis is really depends on the experience of the radiologist.
So you're saying some radiologists are just better at seeing those prostate tumors than others?
Yeah, unfortunately, that's true. And because of that variability, you can get missed cancers that maybe should have been treated, or you can get unnecessary biopsies.
So basically, the current system isn't always great at, like, actually knowing who has cancer or not. And it also leads to a lot of those unnecessary biopsies, which I imagine are both stressful for patients and also risky.
Exactly. And the average positive predictive value, which is the chance that a positive test is actually cancer, is only around 50%.
Wow, 50%. That's
Oh,
like
yeah.
flipping a coin.
Yeah,
It's no wonder that AI is being looked at to improve those odds.
right. And then aside from accuracy, there's the issue of efficiency. Radiologists have to go through and look at every single MRI, which takes a lot of time.
Which I imagine can lead to delays, which is, of course, not ideal when you're talking about cancer.
Absolutely. Delays can really impact how well treatments work.
And speaking of limitations, the case study that you sent over, really eye-opening. It was about a 70-year-old man whose radiologist saw a PI-RDs or 4 lesion,
Right.
and that's a high suspicion of cancer, right?
Yeah.
At the base of the prostate, but they missed a more subtle, a PIRADS3 lesion, which turned out to be a clinically significant cancer.
And unfortunately, that misdiagnosis likely led to a positive surgical margin after he had surgery. So basically, there was cancer left behind.
Ah, that's so unfortunate. And it really seems like in a situation like that, an AI system might have been able to flag that PIRADS3 lesion, which is why all this research into what AI can do in prostate cancer diagnosis is so important.
Absolutely.
So you also provided us with a study called the PICAI Challenge, published in the Lancet Oncology in 2024. And it basically pitted AI against a bunch of radiologists.
Yes. And that study, the AI did really well. It had a much higher area under the receiver operating characteristic curve, or AURC, which basically means it was more accurate overall.
So it's more accurate overall. Okay.
Yeah. And specifically, it had 50% fewer false positives. So it was much better at avoiding those unnecessary biopsies.
Huge, huge win for patients. But you mentioned earlier that AI isn't quite ready to replace human expertise fully. So what's the catch? What's going on there?
Well, in that PI-CAI challenge, the AI was only looking at the images. It didn't have any of the additional information that radiologists usually use, such as the PSA levels, family history, that sort of thing. Plus, in the real world, radiologists work as part of an MDT to make these decisions.
So it's about context. It's not just about looking at the images themselves. It's about all of the other information surrounding the case.
Exactly. And when they compared the AI to those radiologists who had access to all that extra information, the AI didn't actually do any better.
So, okay, it sounds like AI has a lot of potential for analyzing the images themselves, but it still has to be part of a larger decision-making process.
Exactly.
Which brings us to, these different ways that AI can be integrated. And you've emphasized that collaboration is really key here. You've talked about several scenarios for how AI and humans can work together.
That's right.
So let's start with what you call the AI standalone scenario. This is where the AI analyzes the MRI images and then makes the decision about whether the patient needs to be referred to that MDT for a biopsy.
Yeah, but there are a lot of concerns about that particular approach.
Yeah, like what?
Well, for one, there are ethical and legal issues. If the AI makes a mistake, who's responsible? And then there's also a lot of discomfort around removing the human element from healthcare entirely.
I can definitely see that. It does seem like a big leap to put that much trust into an AI. And plus, wouldn't the AI have to be incredibly accurate for that to even be considered?
Yeah, it would have to be consistently better than even the most experienced radiologists.
So for now, it sounds like AI standalone is off the table. What about using AI more as like a decision support tool?
That's a much more realistic scenario, and in this case, the AI would provide the radiologist with extra information, sort of like a second opinion.
So it's like having a really smart assistant that's helping the radiologist make the best decision.
Exactly. And this could be especially helpful for less experienced radiologists, bringing their performance up closer to the level of the experts.
That makes sense. We want to make sure all patients are getting the best care possible, regardless of, who's reading their MRI. But are there any drawbacks to think about with this approach?
Yes, there are a few things to consider.
Like what?
First, the AI's output has to be clear, easy for the radiologist to understand. You don't want to be giving them a bunch of complex data that they can't really use.
Right, so it needs to fit into their workflow.
What else? The other big thing is training. Radiologists need to be trained on how to effectively use the AI. We don't want them to become overly reliant on it and miss something that the AI maybe didn't catch.
So it's about using AI to, enhance their judgment, not replace it.
Exactly. We call that over-reliance automation bias, and it's a real concern.
And you actually shared a case study that illustrated this perfectly. It was about a 74-year-old man who ended up having unnecessary biopsies because the radiologist put too much trust in what the AI was saying.
Right. That just shows how important it is for radiologists to be trained properly and to remember that they're the ones who are ultimately making the decisions.
So we've talked about AI standalone. We've talked about AI for decision support. What's next?
Another scenario is using AI as an additional reader or a safety net.
Okay, what does that involve?
So in this case, both the AI and the radiologist would review the MRI independently, and then the MDT would look at both assessments when deciding about a biopsy.
So it's like having two expert sets of eyes on the case, which could help catch cancers that might have been missed.
Exactly.
But I'm guessing there are downsides to this approach as well, right?
Yes, one concern is that you might see an increase in false positives and unnecessary biopsies. The AI might flag something that the radiologist would have dismissed, leading to sort of a more cautious approach.
Right, so we want to catch all the cancers, but we also want to avoid unnecessary procedures.
Exactly. It's about finding a balance.
Anything else we should be wary of?
There's also the risk that the MDT might over-rely on the AI's findings. We call this MDT automation bias.
So even if you have a human radiologist involved, you can still run into this problem of being too reliant on the AI.
That's right.
I think one of the studies that you shared illustrated this really well. The AI detected more cancers, but it also increased the number of target lesions and the false positive rate.
Yeah, so it really demonstrated that trade-off that you have to consider.
Okay, so it seems like in this AI as an additional reader scenario, training the whole MDT to think critically about what the AI is saying is even more important.
Absolutely. It's a tool to help them, not to dictate their decisions.
So we've got these scenarios where the AI is making the referral decision, assisting the radiologist, acting as an additional reader. What about using AI to triage cases?
That's another interesting possibility. And here, the AI would kind of pre-screen all the MRIs and decide which ones need to be seen right away and which ones can maybe be safely delayed or even skipped.
Okay, so that makes sense. Optimize resources.
Yeah.
Make sure the most urgent cases are seen first.
Exactly.
So how would that work?
The AI would basically act as a gatekeeper. If it thought a case was highly suspicious, then it would get sent right to a radiologist for review. But if the AI was really confident that a case was negative, no cancer then?
What happens?
There are a few options. The patient could just be discharged back to their primary care physician, or they could have a follow-up MRI later on, just to be sure.
But for that to work, the AI would have to be extremely good at correctly identifying those negative cases, right?
Yeah, that rule-out ability is crucial for patient safety.
Any other potential pitfalls with this AI for triage approach?
We still need to watch out for automation bias. Clinicians could become overly reliant on the AI's decisions and potentially miss something.
So again, it's finding that balance between AI efficiency and human oversight.
Exactly.
So we got one last scenario to talk about, and that's what you call AI for high confidence filtering.
Yeah, this one's interesting because it gives the AI a little bit more autonomy. So the AI would make the final decision in cases that it's very certain about whether that's high suspicion or very low suspicion.
So the AI is basically filtering out the cases that are clear-cut, leaving the radiologist to focus on those that are more tricky, more ambiguous.
Exactly.
But I imagine there's some ethical concerns with giving AI that much power to make decisions.
Yes, definitely. We need to be absolutely sure that the AI is performing at a very high level, both in terms of ruling in cancer and ruling out cancer.
Because we're essentially trusting the AI to be a gatekeeper, right?
That's right. And we also need clear protocols for what happens if a case is borderline, where the AI isn't quite sure enough to make a decision.
Right. You don't want those cases falling through the cracks.
Exactly.
So for this high confidence filtering scenario to work, you need the AI performing really well, and you need those procedures in place to handle the trickier cases. Okay, so we've explored 5 potential scenarios: standalone, decision support, additional reader, triage, and high confidence filtering. And as we've talked about, each one has its advantages and disadvantages.
And that brings us to another important scenario: AI-assisted targeted review workflow. This one blends elements of AI triage and decision support.
This sounds interesting. How does it work?
So we start with an AI algorithm that's very sensitive, really good at finding anything unusual on the MRI.
Like a super meticulous set of eyes spotting anything suspicious.
Exactly. It analyzes the whole scan and highlights anything potentially concerning.
But it doesn't decide about a biopsy.
Right. The radiologist comes in and reviews every case, focusing on those AI-highlighted areas.
So the AI acts as a guide, directing the radiologist's attention.
That's it. And this is where targeted review comes in. The radiologist isn't just accepting the AI's findings. They're using their own expertise, considering what they see, the patient's history, PSA levels, everything.
It's a real collaboration, AI enhancing human judgment.
It is. And importantly, the radiologist also looks at cases the AI initially classified as negative.
A double-check system to make sure nothing is missed.
Exactly. This verification step reduces the risk of relying solely on the AI. Every case gets the right level of attention.
This AI-assisted targeted review workflow seems like it could strike a great balance. Efficiency and accuracy, using the best of both AI and human expertise.
And the best approach is going to depend on a lot of factors.
So it's not just about the technology, but also how it fits into the clinical workflow, all of those ethical considerations that are involved.
Exactly.
And I think it's important to reiterate that the goal here is to use AI to actually improve patient outcomes, not just to replace human expertise.
Absolutely. It's about finding the right balance.
All right, so I think we've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive. We've looked at the limitations of how things are done now, the potential of AI, and 5 different scenarios for integrating AI into the process.
Yeah, it's been a really interesting conversation.
And I'm sure you've got lots more to share about what's needed to make these different scenarios actually work.
Yeah, for sure. So to really make these AI scenarios work, one of the big things to consider is AI performance.
Right, we can't really expect a tool to be helpful if it's not accurate and reliable. How should we think about that in the context of prostate cancer diagnosis?
Well, I think the first thing to keep in mind is that the AI's performance has to be at least as good as what we're already doing, which is having a single radiologist interpret that MRI.
So like the bar is set at matching or exceeding human performance.
Exactly. And how good it needs to be, like the level of performance really depends on how we're using it. The more autonomy you give it, the higher the stakes and the better it needs to perform.
So if the AI is just giving the radiologist some additional information, maybe the accuracy bar doesn't have to be as high as if it's actually deciding which patients should get a biopsy.
That's right.
This makes me think about that idea of like ruling in and ruling out cancer. It seems like, the AI's performance might need to be different depending on whether it's trying to confirm or exclude the presence of cancer.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And we talk about those concepts in terms of sensitivity and specificity. And those basically tell us how good the AI is at correctly identifying those with and without cancer.
Okay, so can you break those terms down for? I always get sensitivity and specificity mixed up.
Sure. So sensitivity is about how good the AI is at actually finding the cancer when it's there. We don't want to be missing any cancers, so we want that sensitivity to be really high.
Okay, that makes sense. And specificity?
Specificity is how good the AI is at avoiding false alarms. So correctly identifying the people who actually don't have cancer. If it's got low specificity, we're going to end up doing a lot of unnecessary biopsies.
So both high sensitivity and high specificity are important, but maybe the emphasis shifts a little bit depending on how we're using the AI.
Exactly. And when we're talking about reducing those unnecessary biopsies, that's where we really focus on the AI's ability to rule out cancer effectively. And that means having a high sensitivity to catch all the true cases and a high negative predictive value, or NPV.
Okay, so a high NPV means that if the AI says there's no cancer, you can be pretty sure that that's right.
Yes.
Okay, and what about when we're trying to make sure that the people who actually do have cancer get the treatment they need?
That's when we're talking about ruling in cancer, and there, you really want a high specificity to avoid those false positives, along with a high positive predictive value, or PPV.
So a high PPV means that if the AI says there is cancer, we can be pretty confident that a biopsy is actually needed.
Exactly. And again, those specific levels that you need for each of those things will depend on which of those scenarios you're talking about.
Okay, so let's kind of walk through each of those scenarios that we talked about before and think about what kind of performance is needed for each one.
We're talking about.
Right, back to those scenarios. How do these metrics fit in, starting with AI standalone?
Okay, so AI standalone, remember, it's making the referral decision all by itself, no human involved.
Right, like it is the radiologist.
Exactly. And because of that, the performance bar is sky high. To even consider this, AI would have to be way better at both finding and ruling out cancer than even the most experienced radiologist.
Wow, so like superhuman accuracy.
Pretty much. Sensitivity and NPV would need to be super high, no cancers missed. And specificity and PPV, those need to be exceptional too. So only truly suspicious cases get biopsied.
A tough ask, performance-wise.
It is. That's a big reason this approach isn't being widely used yet. The tech just isn't there.
Okay, what about something a bit more realistic, like AI for decision support? How do the requirements change?
Here, AI is more of a consultant, right? Helping the radiologist make the call.
Providing extra input, but not the final say.
Right. So the bar isn't as high as standalone, but it still needs to be good.
I'd guess the sensitivity and NPV should be higher than the average radiologist to help catch those subtle cancers.
Yes. And specificity, PPV, those should at least be as good as a human, so it's giving reliable info on whether cancer is actually there.
Enhancing the radiologist's judgment, not trying to replace it.
That's the idea, a true partnership.
Now, AI is an additional reader. What about those metrics there?
Well, we're treating the AI like another expert, essentially. Ideally, its performance is at least as good as, if not better than, a human radiologist.
So similar levels of sensitivity, specificity, all that.
Exactly. We want it just as good, if not better, at finding cancers and ruling them out.
But even with a really good AI in this case, the radiologist, the whole team, they're still carefully considering the AI's findings, right?
Absolutely. Not blindly accepting. It's a tool to inform the decision, the whole process.
Okay, on to AI for triage. This one seems interesting because it's about prioritizing, potentially avoiding delays.
It is. And the performance needs here are trickier because the AI is making two kinds of decisions.
Deciding which cases are urgent and which ones can wait.
Exactly. For high suspicion cases, the performance needs to match at least the average radiologist. We can't miss anything a human would have caught.
So specificity, PPV, comparable to or even better than human radiologists.
Right. But then, for cases the AI thinks are low suspicion, the rule-out metrics are even more important.
Because you might delay or even skip a biopsy based on what the AI says.
Exactly. So there, the AI needs to be really good at ruling out cancer. Sensitivity and NPV, those need to be exceptionally high.
That's a balancing act then, depending on the level of suspicion.
Good way to put it. And finally, there's AI for high confidence filtering, where it has the most autonomy, actually makes the call in some cases.
Like a gatekeeper, deciding which cases need attention and which are clear.
You got it. And because of that, the performance bar is the highest of all. We need to be absolutely sure the AI is getting it right.
So we're talking way higher sensitivity, specificity, the whole 9 yards than what we usually see with human radiologists.
Exactly. We're trusting the AI with critical decisions, so performance has to be exceptional.
The requirements for these different scenarios really are all over the map, from matching humans to way exceeding them.
Right, and understanding these nuances, that's essential for choosing the right AI approach for each clinic and making sure it's used safely and effectively.
Okay, so we've got the metrics and how demanding each scenario is. Now tell me more about that AI-assisted targeted review workflow. It blends triage and decision support, right? How do the metrics fit there?
Great question. In that workflow, the AI is basically the first reader highlighting anything potentially concerning on the MRI.
So like a roadmap for the radiologist, showing them where to focus.
Perfect analogy. And because of that, we want the AI to be super sensitive, catch any possible abnormality.
Sensitivity's got to be top-notch.
Absolutely. We can't miss anything important clinically.
But the AI isn't the one deciding about a biopsy, right? That's still the radiologist.
That's right. They review everything, focusing on what the AI highlighted, and use their expertise to make the call.
So here, the AI's performance is about guiding the radiologist, not replacing them.
Exactly. Using both AI and human strengths for a more efficient and accurate process.
You mentioned the radiologist also reviews cases the AI thought were negative. Why is that so important?
Good catch. That's a crucial step. You see, even though we want high sensitivity, the AI might still miss something on rare occasion.
It's a safety net.
Precisely. The radiologist reviews everything, including the AI's negative cases, so we're extra sure nothing is missed.
That verification step really helps make sure we're not just relying on the AI blindly.
It does. It's all about that balance. AI efficiency, but with human oversight.
So there's a lot to think about when it comes to AI performance. Are there other things, like other factors that can influence how well this is all going to work, how effectively AI can be used in prostate cancer diagnosis?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we've already talked about automation bias, that tendency to over-rely on the AI's findings. Even with good AI, you need to address that through education and training.
It's not just about having good AI, it's about using it well.
Exactly. And then you also have to consider things like how experienced the radiologist is, how familiar they are with AI, how complex the task is, and how the AI system is actually presenting the information to them.
So there's a human element there too.
Absolutely. It's about creating a good partnership between the human and the AI, where each one is contributing their strengths.
So lots of potential for bias here. Sounds like walking through a minefield. Can we get into that now?
Definitely. First, we got to make sure we're all on the same page about what bias actually means when we're talking about clinical AI.
Because it's not just about personal opinions, right?
No, we're talking about basically systematic errors or inaccuracies in what the AI spits out, which could lead to diagnoses that aren't fair or just plain wrong. One kind we see a lot is deployment bias. So that's when the AI is basically being used the wrong way or with the wrong kind of imaging, like using a hammer to put in a screw, just the wrong tool for the job.
Okay, so use the right tool. Got it. What other types of bias are there?
Concept drift is another common one. Basically, the AI might get worse over time. Think about it. Medical practices and tech are always changing. So the AI needs to keep learning and be retrained. Otherwise, it's like trying to use an outdated map to get around a city that's been totally rebuilt. You're going to get lost.
So AI has to keep up with the times, just like the rest of us. Anything else?
We also need to be aware of what's called covariate shift. That's when the data used to train the AI doesn't match the real patients it'll be used on. It's like if you trained an AI to identify birds using only pictures of eagles, it might be great at spotting eagles, but show it a robin and it'll have no clue.
So AI needs to see all the different possibilities, right? Like a diverse education.
Exactly. And then there are the biases that come from how humans interact with the AI. This is where it gets really interesting, like automation bias. That's when clinicians rely too much on the AI, even if it goes against their gut feeling.
It's like that case study you sent about the 74-year-old man who got unnecessary biopsies because a radiologist just trusted the AI too much.
Yeah.
Doctors can't become robots themselves. They've got to think for themselves too.
You got it. It's about finding that sweet spot, balancing human expertise with the AI's insights. Not always easy. Then there's confirmation bias. Clinicians might favor the AI's findings if they already thought that way, even if they were wrong to begin with. It's like only listening to news that agrees with what you already believe.
So the bias can come from us too, not just the AI.
Exactly. And then there's the opposite problem, algorithmic aversion. That's when clinicians just don't trust AI, period. So they might ignore good advice from it. It's like having a super fancy GPS, but you just refuse to use it because you like your old paper maps better.
Seems like the key is finding the right level of trust and a bit of healthy skepticism, I guess. So lots of potential for bias here. Sounds like walking through a minefield.
Definitely complex, but we can handle it. The important thing is knowing about these biases and then, figuring out ways to deal with them.
Okay, that makes sense. So how do we actually do that? What are the best practices for developing and using AI in a way that, keeps these risks as low as possible?
Well, that's a topic for our next segment. Now, moving on a bit, I think it's really important to talk about the ethical implications of actually using or not using AI in this whole context. This is something that often gets missed, but it's so important to consider.
Yeah, it does seem like there are ethical issues to think about on both sides of that coin.
Exactly. Let's start by talking about, what are the ethical concerns if you don't use AI for prostate cancer diagnosis?
All right, so what are we risking by sticking with the way things are done now?
Well, I think one of the big concerns is that you're kind of perpetuating the limitations of the existing system.
You mean the variability in accuracy, the delays, the unnecessary biopsies, all that stuff?
Exactly. By choosing not to use AI, you're basically accepting that some patients may not be getting the best possible care. And I think that really raises some questions about, are we actually meeting our obligation to provide the highest standard of care possible?
Yeah, that's an important point. It's not just about the technology itself. It's about our responsibility to use the best tools that we have to help patients.
Exactly. And then you also have the question of, by not using AI, are we missing an opportunity to really improve patient outcomes more broadly?
Yeah, we talked about how AI could lead to more accurate diagnoses, fewer unnecessary biopsies, a more efficient workflow. So by not using it, we're potentially denying those benefits to patients.
Exactly.
So yeah, some big ethical questions to think about on the side of not using AI. What about the flip side? What are the ethical concerns about using AI?
Yeah, so one of the big ones, and we've talked about this a bit already, is automation bias.
Right, the risk of over-relying on the findings from the AI and missing something important.
Exactly. And it's not just about, individual doctors falling into that trap, but making sure that the systems and processes are designed to minimize that risk at every level.
So you're talking about like building in those safeguards to how AI is actually used.
Yeah.
Are there any other ethical issues we need to think about?
I think transparency and accountability are really important.
What do you mean by that?
Well, patients should be informed about how AI is being used in their care. They should have a say in whether they want to be involved or not.
Right, so it's about respecting patient autonomy.
Exactly. And then we also need to have very clear guidelines and protocols for how AI is used in practice. Who's responsible for the decisions that it makes? How do you address potential errors? All of that.
So it's about making sure that AI is used ethically and responsibly with a focus on patient safety.
Exactly.
It seems like there's so much to consider with the ethics of AI and prostate cancer diagnosis. It's not just about the technology, but how we're using it. What are the implications for patients, for the healthcare system?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really complex issue, and one that requires a lot of careful thought and ongoing discussion.
Well, this has been an incredibly informative deep dive. We've talked about the limitations of the current system, the potential for AI, even some real-world examples of how it's already making a difference.
Yeah, a lot to think about.
Before we go, any final thoughts or key takeaways you want to leave our listeners with?
I think the biggest takeaway is that AI has the potential to really revolutionize prostate cancer diagnosis and care, but it's not a magic bullet.
It's a powerful tool, but we have to use it thoughtfully, responsibly, and always working with human expertise.
Exactly. And this is such a rapidly evolving field. The AI systems of tomorrow are going to be, even more sophisticated, more powerful than what we have right now.
So we need to stay informed and keep having these conversations about how to best integrate AI into healthcare, always with that focus on patient safety.
Couldn't agree more.
Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive into AI and prostate cancer diagnosis. Thanks for joining us on this journey. We hope you've learned something new and feel empowered to have your own conversations about the role of AI in healthcare.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
And to all our listeners out there, thanks for tuning in. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into the world of science and technology.